Section 6. State Department officials viewed Zlochevsky as a corrupt, odious oligarch, but Vice President Biden was advised not to accuse Zlochevsky of corruption. A. Introduction. The State Department clearly viewed Burisma and its owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, corrupt, and did not want to have any association with either one. For example, as soon as Deputy Chief of Mission George Kent learned of a de minimis U.S. aid arrangement with Burisma and succeeded in severing that relationship. As U.S. officials pressed Ukrainian officials to hold Zlochevsky accountable for his actions, Vice President Biden was leading the policy charge of pushing anti-corruption measures in Ukraine, which included confronting oligarchs. Yet, as staff prepared talking points for Vice President Biden to answer questions about whether he viewed Zlochevsky as corrupt, they suggested that he not get into naming names or accusing individuals. Biden's spokeswoman told reporters, "The Vice President does not endorse any particular company and has no involvement with this company." This stands in stark contrast to the decision of then Ambassador Geoffrey Pyatt to call out Zlochevsky by name as an example of corruption in a September 2015 speech. Biden's unwillingness to confront a man whom state officials considered to be an odious oligarch demonstrated a lack of leadership, but also raises a serious question about why Vice President Biden would avoid linking Zlochevsky with corruption. B. State Department officials viewed Zlochevsky and Burisma as corrupt. According to testimony and documents obtained by the committees, State Department officials viewed Burisma and its owner, Zlochevsky, as corrupt. Insofar as the link between Zlochevsky and corruption was not already clear to State Department officials, in early 2015, they learned that Zlochevsky likely bribed Ukrainian prosecutors to interfere in a United Kingdom criminal proceeding against him, which was subsequently closed. Section 7 of this report will describe this bribe and its consequences in more detail. In short, State Department officials' understanding of Zlochevsky's actions relating to the UK criminal case strongly influenced their perspective of him and Burisma. Below are several examples of State Department officials sharing their perspective of Zlochevsky and Burisma. Zlochevsky was viewed as corrupt, not just in Ukraine, but by the USG FBI. George Kent, Department of State, September 2016. We have extensive concerns about corruption in Ukraine, and we believe Mr. Zlochevsky is an example. Memo to then U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Ivanovich, December 2016. Burisma's owner was a poster child for corrupt behavior. George Kent, testimony to the committees. I would have advised any American not to get on the board of Zlochevsky's company. George Kent, testimony to the committees. The proliferation of Ukrainian companies clearly and not so clearly owned, controlled by the odious oligarchs or those who outright stole assets and absconded, like Zlochevsky, is likely a long one. George Kent, Department of State, August 2016. Throughout 2015 and 2016, U.S. officials, particularly those at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, consistently pressed Ukrainian officials to hold Zlochevsky to account and made clear our negative view about Burisma. George Kent, testimony to the committees. Our focus was on Zlochevsky's corrupt acts as minister, when he abused the office to award national gas exploration contracts to companies that he controlled through shell companies. George Kent, testimony to the committees. In the case of former Ecology Minister Mykola Zlochevsky, the UK authorities had seized $23 million in illicit assets that belonged to the Ukrainian people. Geoffrey Pyatt, then U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, September 2015. The closing of the UK case against Zlochevsky was a gross miscarriage of justice that undermined months of U.S. assistance. After the FBI and MI5 spent months and arguably millions working to try to put together the first possible asset recovery case against former Minister of Ecology Zlochevsky, George Kent, State Department, August 2016. The US and UK were cooperating on a case to seize Zlochevsky's corrupt assets overseas, which had passed through the US. Geoffrey Pyatt, then US Ambassador to Ukraine, December 2015. There is a moral hazard associated with publicly associating, promoting our assistance projects with companies, individuals seen in Ukraine society as corrupt, compromised. George Kent, on whether any U.S. agency should cooperate or associate with Burisma or Zlochevsky, August 2016. United States government, USG, cooperation on the project with Burisma would make us look bad. Not to mention the members of Parliament on the Energy Committee and others would wonder how we speak about anti-corruption, but work with those that were associated with corrupt practices. Redacted State Department official in an email to colleagues, September 2016. There is a clear link between the company and its primary owner. From the rumors that we hear in the energy sector, there is no sense that Burisma has changed how it conducts its business. I fall on the side of not having anything to do with the company to avoid undermining our broader efforts to promote transparency and anti-corruption. Redacted State Department official in an email to colleagues, September 2016. C. State Department officials viewed Vice President Biden as a warrior and leading the policy charge on anti-corruption measures in Ukraine. According to testimony, former State Department officials saw Vice President Biden as a leading U.S. figure who pushed for anti-corruption measures in Ukraine. Kent testified, Vice President Biden was leading the policy charge, pushing President Poroshenko and Prime Minister Yatsenyuk to take more decisive anti-corruption action. Ambassador Victoria Nuland called Vice President Biden a warrior on this issue and said, I was proud to work with Vice President Biden on Ukraine policy, and especially on trying to help the Ukrainian period root out corruption in their country. On December 9, 2015, Vice President Biden spoke in Ukraine in front of the Parliament of Ukraine, the Verkhovna Rada, and told the members that they are facing a test of courage and have an obligation to Ukrainians to reform their country, to build a united democratic Ukrainian nation that can stand the test of time. In doing so, Biden stated that Ukrainians have a historic battle against corruption. He said, oligarchs and non-oligarchs must play by the same rules. Biden called on the Rada to seize the opportunity, build a better future for the people of Ukraine. Biden's speech, which pushed anti-corruption measures, was, according to Nuland, very powerful and powerfully received by the Rada. Yet, while Vice President Biden called for members of the Rada to have courage to confront corruption in Ukraine, the Vice President's staff was advising otherwise. D. Vice President Biden's staff recommended he not link Zlochevsky with corruption. Nuland told the committees that by confronting oligarchs, the U.S. would send an anti-corruption message. Yet, as Vice President Biden's staff responded to press inquiries relating to Burisma and Zlochevsky, one staffer wrote, I am concerned about getting into anything relating to Mr. Zlochevsky directly. Just a few days before the Vice President gave his December 2015 speech at the Rada, pushing anti-corruption measures, his staff prepared talking points for him and included a response to the question, do you think Zlochevsky is corrupt? His staff wrote, I'm not going to get into naming names or accusing individuals. We have been working consistently to push Ukrainian leadership to make meaningful changes in the Prosecutor General's office and across the government to help ensure that the Ukrainian people are represented fairly and fully. It is clear that members of Vice President Biden's staff wanted to distance him from an individual whom the State Department clearly believed was corrupt and an individual who employed his son. This stands in stark contrast to then Ambassador Geoffrey Payot, who identified Zlochevsky by name as a corrupt actor during a September 2015 speech in Odessa, Ukraine. But the committees were not able to locate any public statements Vice President Biden gave from 2014 to 2016 in which he called Zlochevsky corrupt. Instead, in December 2015, Biden's spokeswoman told reporters, the Vice President does not endorse any particular company and has no involvement with this company. E. Conclusion. In his December 2015 speech at the Rada, Vice President Biden told members to have courage to confront corruption and change the course of history for their country. Yet, when it came to calling out an individual whom the State Department viewed as a corrupt and odious oligarch, Vice President Biden's staff advised him not to accuse Zlochevsky of corruption. In December 2015, while in Ukraine, Biden did not link Zlochevsky with corruption and did not demonstrate the same level of courageousness that he encouraged Ukrainian political leaders to pursue. Several witnesses highlighted efforts by certain U.S. officials to enable a successful investigation of Zlochevsky, and also noted that the U.S. decision to condition a $1 billion loan guarantee was made in part because of the then Ukrainian Prosecutor General's failure to pursue a case against Zlochevsky. But at the end of the day, between 2014 through 2017, despite the concerted effort of many U.S. officials, not one of the 3 different Ukrainian Prosecutor Generals held Zlochevsky accountable.